Hello and welcome to the world of literature. I am your host with the series 100 FP. In this series, we will be dealing with 100 famous novels from, 100 famous plays from English literature. We have been dealing with 100 famous novels from English literature in the other series. Now we are coming up with a new series where we would be dealing with some significant novels from the English literature. And the structure of even this lecture would be similar to that of 100 FN, wherein we would be dealing with a play consisting of the lecture would be consisting of different sections. For example, first up we would take certain facts about the novel, and that very section would be called as clues about the novel. Then we will deal with the characters, followed by the plots, and then there would be a review of the story, and finally the ending of the story. Well, we thought to begin rather this series from William Shakespeare, and we have recorded many lectures of William Shakespeare which would be soon brought to you. In this particular lecture we would be dealing with a dramatist from the 20th century, when he happens to be one of the most significant and famous playwright from the 20th century. He was also awarded Nobel Prize. Yes, I am talking about George Bernard Shaw. George Bernard Shaw is credited of having written many plays, though in this lecture I won't be dealing with the life and the contribution of George Bernard Shaw. Rather, we will be taking up one of the plays of George Bernard Shaw in this particular video. So let's see what lies for the today's lecture. Up next are coming the clues about the play. Well, Shaw was used to writing preface to every play, or to most of the plays that he wrote. And Shaw wrote in the preface of this particular play that, I quote, "There are no villains in this piece. Crime, like disease, is not interesting. It is something to be done away with by general consent, and that is all there is about it. It is what men do at their best with good intentions, and what moral men and women find that they must and will do in spite of their intentions, that really concern us." Play is about a 15th century French military figure, Joan of Arc. Michael Holroyd, a critic, said about the play, as I quote, "a tragedy without villains." T.S. Eliot, another famous playwright and critic from 20th century, said about the play, I quote, "that play seems to illustrate Mr. Shaw's mind more clearly than anything he has written before." These were the clues about the novel, rather about the play. If you have not been able to guess the play that we are going to discuss today, let's tell you, at the world of literature today we will be dealing with St. John by George Bernard Shaw. Now this is the play that we will deal today with, and in the next section we will be dealing with the characters from the play St. John. World of literature today we would be discussing about St. John by George Bernard Shaw. Now, before taking up the plot, let's have a look at the characters from the novel Joan of Arc. Well, bear with me with the pronunciations of the names, because most of the characters from the play would be the French citizens, and the names would be either Spanish or French, and they would be very difficult to pronounce up front. Well, we have the protagonist of the play. She is Joan of Arc. We have Robert de Baudricourt. He is described as a gentlemanly squire. We have Bertrand de Poligny. She is shortly described as Polly, and I'd also be referring to her Polly, which is fairly easy to pronounce in the course of the story. He is one of the John's first converts. We have the Archbishop of Reims. He is the churchman. We have Giles de Reyes. He is also called as Bluebeard. That is what I will be calling him in the course of the story. He is a captain. We have Dauphin. He will play the role of Charles VII. We have Jonah. Now he is also called as a bastard, and this is what I would be calling him in the course of the story, because French names won't be that easy to remember and pronounce time and again. Now the bastard is described as a young, popular and efficient leader. We have Earl of Warwick. He is an English earl, And we have John de Stugumber. He is the Earl of Warwick's chaplain. Now we have Peter Kashan. He is the academic theologian. We have D.S. Stewart. He is the prosecutor against John. And we have Brother Martin Lagenu. He is a sympathetic young priest. These were the characters from the play, and I bet these are the most difficult names to pronounce, and these are the names with which we will be dealing in this particular play, and you will have to at least remember, if you cannot pronounce them properly, we have to remember the names of these characters, because around these characters the story of this play St. John would be revolving. Now up next we will be taking up the plot of the novel. So coming to the plot of the novel, the scene first, this particular play is only divided into the scene. So first scene takes place in the spring of the year 1429 AD. Now you need to remember that this is a historical play, and the play would deal with the story of a young girl, a fighter from the 100 Years' War that took place in medieval times between England and France. And that is why the first scene of the play you will find in the medieval era in 1429 in the castle of Captain Robert de Baudricourt. Now he is the first character to be introduced in the story as the novel begins. Now Baudricourt is described as a young, handsome and physically energetic man, but he has no will of his own, without any will of his own. And I will be calling him Robert de Baudricourt. I will be calling him as Sir Robert. So whenever I refer to Sir Robert, you must understand that I am referring to Robert de Baudricourt. Now Sir Robert, he is running around in disgust at his house in the castle in the very first scene. And the reason is very trivial. There are no eggs in the house. And his steward, he informs him that it is an act of God that the hens will not lay eggs. Now, that is a strange, dramatic thing happening out there, that it's the will of God that today hens won't be laying egg, and there is a reason. And steward informs him that there is a spell on us. We are bewitched as long as the maid is at the door. Now there is a reference to certain character from the novel. She is not introduced properly here. She is introduced here as the maid, and shortly we will come to know about who she is. Now Sir Robert is thunderstruck that the maid from Lorraine is still outside, because he dismissed her 2 days ago. But we hear that she will not leave. She is so positive about meeting Sir Robert, until Sir Robert grants her an interview. Now in a blustering manner, he goes to the window and orders her to come up. Now who is the maid? The maid is the Saint John about whom this novel would be, this play rather would be dealing, the John of art. Now when John enters, she is seen to be a 16 or 17 years old, able-bodied country girl. She immediately informs Robert, without any delay, that he is ordered to give her a horse, armor and some soldiers, and that he must send her to Dauphin. Now that's the bunk entry of John. That's the strange entry of John. She won't ask Sir Robert anything except a horse, armor and soldiers, as if she is going for a siege. Now is she going seriously for a siege? We would come to know shortly. Now Sir Robert is offended that anyone would dare to give him orders, and he is astonished to find out that the Lord who sent the orders is Lord of heaven. He immediately assumes that the girl is mad and she has no business with this man except coming up there to disturb him. However, John won't stop here. She then tells him exactly the cost of the armor and the horses, and that she will need many soldiers. And rather, she will not need many soldiers, because the Dauphin will provide her enough soldiers to raise the siege of Orleans. Now it is in the very first scene that we are introduced to this emphatic and enthusiastic character Joan, and we are also getting the clue that what she is asking for, armor, horses and soldiers, is because she is going to take up a siege of Orleans. Now, Sir Robert is astonished at this young 16-year-old girl who is talking war, who is talking fighting, who is talking about horses, about armors. And before he could have said anything or he could have addressed this John, no, she continues and she says that the voices of Saint Catherine and Margaret have spoken to her and told her that this is to be so, that John is going to take the siege of Orleans. Furthermore, she lets Sir Robert know that some of his noblemen, such as Bertrand de Polony, Polly, that whom I would be calling as Polly, is anxious to go with her. Hearing this, Sir Robert dismisses the maid and sends for Polly. He is seeking for Polly, that has he really asked John, this mad girl, this maid, that he would be joining her. Now, as the scene progresses, he questions John, who's Sir Robert, and when he questions John, she maintains that she is following the instruction of her voices. Now, which is again strange. She is literally a mad kind of a character when she says that I am hearing my voices, and she says, which she will not further discuss, I am not going to tell you much about the voices that I hear, and my voices have told me to take the siege at Orleans, and I have come here for your help. This is what she is actually saying. But which tell her that the English are only men and that they must be forced to return to their own country and their own language. Now that is what is the purpose of this John. These Englishmen have entered the soil of France, and it is my duty, and the saints have told me to throw them out of the France and send them back to England where they actually belong to. She asserts that Sir Robert will live to see the day when there will not be an English soldier on the soil of France, and when there will be one king, God's French, one. And now that is the enthusiasm of this particular lady, Joan of Arc. Now, what would transpire in her life, we will come to know, but eventually we are told that Sir Robert is finally convinced, he believes that the troops and ultimately the Dauphin might swallow John's conviction and her dedication. Maybe even the Dauphin might take courage from John's determination. Well, we are introduced to this character called Dauphin. He is a very weak and coward kind of a character in the story, and Sir Robert is not very much enthusiastic about what John is saying, or very positive or optimistic about her boasting remarks that she has been making. But she thinks that once she goes to Dauphin, nobody is going to listen her to there, and her enthusiasm would fade away. Now he says that at least it's worth a try. Let me give her some horses and soldiers that she is demanding. He thus orders John to go to Chiron under Polly's escort. She is given a soldier's armor and she dashes off ecstatically. Sir Robert then admits that there is something about her. The scene ends with the hens lying like mad. Now this is something important, that there is something about her. The remark made by Sir Robert at the end of this scene would present to us this particular character, that is John, in most emphatic manner from the play. And now that here first scene ends, and up next we will be taking the second scene. At the end of the first scene, we have realized what this play is heading towards, and we have come to know about the conflict of the play actually, which lies with the protagonist. With remember, the protagonist is a female, Joan of Arc, and she has heard some voices, and she's going to carry a siege at Orleans, and this is what we came to know from the scene 1. And now let's see what happens in scene 2 and where is the scene 2 set. Well, the scene 2 of the play, Joan of Arc, is set in the antechamber of the throne room of Dauphin's castle in Chinon, and the Archbishop of Reims and La Trémoille are discussing the huge sums of money that Dauphin has borrowed from them. And yet the Dauphin is still on the verge of poverty when young Giles de Reyes, better known as Bluebeard, enters and reports that the maid has had a tremendous effect on common soldiers. And this is confirmed by the captain Lahire, who believes that John must be an angel dressed as soldier, especially since she has overcome impossible odds even to get the Chinan. Now here we are given an insight into the other characters. For example, the Dauphin is introduced more closely to the readers, and he would be a significant character in the course of the story. Archbishop is also introduced. He would also be a significant character in the course of the story. Well, Dauphin, who was initially introduced through Sir Robert, who considered him as a very coward kind of a guy, and he thought that maybe John's enthusiasm would put some courage in Dauphin. And here we are told that this guy Dauphin, he also is not only coward, but he is also very poor, and he is lending getting money from other characters in the course of the story. And we are told more about Dauphin. He is a 26 years old. He enters with a letter about Jonah from Sir Robert de Baudricourt. Now, Sir Robert had also written a letter to Dauphin before Jonah could have reached him, and a letter which is bandied about as the Archbishop and Chamberlain bully and intimidate the Dauphin, refusing to let him see the maid, especially since she is not a respectable person. Now this gives more insight into the characters who are surrounding Jonah. They are still considering her a lady without mental health. She is considered to be a mad and not worthy of seeing, and Dauphin is actually prohibited from meeting her. Now, after some more arguing, Bluebeard offers a challenge. Now that is about this Jonah. Now they are discussing whether we should meet Jonah or we should not meet Jonah, whether we should consider Jonah as a mad lady or we should consider her an angel in the soldier's dress. Now they are thinking all these things, and Bluebeard here comes up with an idea, with a challenge. He says that he will pretend to be Dauphin, and if the maid cannot distinguish royalty from common blood, then she is a pretender. If she can, then she must be heaven sent. Now that is the test for John of Arc. That's the test for Saint John, or what we know as John, or we also call her the maid. Now she has a test. Now they would be disguising Dauphin and Bluebeard, and she has to know who is actually Dauphin. And they all then argue about the siege of Orleans and why the highly tutored, respected and beloved bastard Jonas cannot do anything with his military forces. Now he is fighting there, but he has so far failed to get rid of the English forces or the British forces from that particular place. And it is agreed that a miracle indeed is needed to overcome the power of British army. And it is at this time that Bluebeard and Dauphin, they leave to prepare for the impersonation, and the Archbishop and Chamberlain, they discuss the nature of miracles. Now they are going out to execute their plan since Jonah is about to enter. So John enters. She is dressed as a soldier and with cropped hair is admitted, and she creates an immediate sense of hilarity among the ladies because of her attire. Think in 1429 you have a lady who is wearing the male's attire, the attire of a soldier, and what transpires is an atmosphere of hilarity. Jonah, however, is not at all embraced what she is actually doing, and when Bluebeard, he tries to deceive her, she readily dismisses him and goes into the crowd to discover the Dauphin, and she drags him from the crowd and tells him that she has been sent to free France of the English and to crown him king in the Cathedral at Reims. Now that is what is the objective of Jonah, to make this coward guy the king of France, and what she has passed the test which Bluebeard thought that she may not be able to pass, and now they have to accept that this Jonah has got some exceptional qualities. She is not a common girl of 16 years old. And this archbishop, he was also witnessing all that was happening there. When the archbishop is consulted on this matter, he is soon convinced that Jonah is indeed pious, and he asks everyone to leave the maid alone with Dauphin. Now alone, Charles, that is the Dauphin, he is also called Charles, confesses his fright and his miserable condition. Now again, see, to him, he is a very opposite character toward Jonah. Jonah is brave, she is courageous, but he is as if he has been juxtaposed to his courageous nature, and he's miserable. The other enjoy fighting. On the contrary, however, Charles is quiet and sensible, and he doesn't want to kill people. He simply wishes to be left alone to live peacefully. Now John counters that she will put courage. She says that I'll put courage into thee, even though the Dauphin doesn't want courage. He wants to sleep in a comfortable bed and not live in continual terror of being killed or wounded. Now Charles wants John to mind her own business and let him mind his own, but John, however, gradually begins to instill courage and patriotism in him, and she tells him forcefully that she will crown him the king of Reims. In resounding rhetorics, Jonah promises him that the English will be defeated and France will become holy and the Dauphin will rule. Now all these arguments of Jonah, they start developing that nationalism, that courage in Dauphin, which he was lacking actually up to this time. And suddenly, inspired by Jonah's faith and enthusiasm, the Dauphin recalls the members of his court and announces that he has given command of the army to the maid to do with as she likes. Now that is the development of the plot. That is what Jonah wanted to do, and that is what she has been able to get. Now she becomes the commander of the army, of the French army, and now she is free to execute her plans. Now let's see how does she do. Now as the Chamberlain moves threateningly forward, asserting that he is the commander of the army, Jonah pushes and frightened Dauphin forward. He snaps his finger in the Chamberlain's face as Jonah draws her sword, kneels and cries out, "Who is for God and his maid? Who is for Orleans with me?" All of the knights draw their swords in support of the maid as the Archbishop gives a sign of blessings to all gathered here. Now it is here that scene 2 ends, and the plot has developed further, that we have come to know that what was transpiring in the mind of Jonah, what she was up to, and how far has she been able to succeed in her plan. She has been able to persuade most of the characters from the novel. For example, she initially persuaded Sir Robert, now she had persuaded Dauphin, she had persuaded Archbishop, who represent the church, which was the most significant of the characters to be persuaded, because she won't be believing in a girl, in a lady like Jonah, who sins by putting on the dress like the males. Now up to this point, we have come to know that Jonah has been granted full freedom to lead the French army for the siege at Orleans, to fight against Britain and British soldiers. And now let's see what's happening in the British camp. Now we enter into the third scene of the novel, of the play rather, and the scene is set on the south bank of Lorry River near Orleans. And the scene is at about 7 weeks later. What happened in the previous scene, that is at the end of the second scene, there is a lapse of around 7 weeks, and the scene takes place. Jonah, better known as the Bastard, is seen pacing up and down the river bank, calling on the west wind to blow in his direction, for he constantly observes his pennon, that is the flag on his lance, blowing the wrong way. Now he is an army person, he's a captain, and he's out there watching the borders of Spain, of France. It is at this moment that a page enters, and she immediately inquires as to the whereabouts of the maid, and all of a sudden the maid, that is Jonah, she arrives in full armor as a soldier, and immediately the west wind stops blowing. Now that is always, these supernatural elements are associated with this character Jonah. Wherever she goes, things start getting right. But Jonah is too occupied to notice the change in the wind, which he was expecting for quite some time, or he was waiting for that change. Now, upon identifying Jonah as the bastard of Orleans, John wonders why they are on this side of the river. And when the English and Orleans are on the other side, she wants to cross the bridge immediately and attack the English forces. This is the enthusiasm of this lady Joanna. She doesn't want to, take herself back. She just wants to attack and attack and attack the Englishmen. She just wants to draw them out of the French land. And she wonders what is this guy doing here on the other side of the bridge. And Juno explains that the older and wiser military experts say such a tactic simply cannot be done. You cannot just go and attack the enemy without any planning. But Jonah dismisses the experts and far heads. She is determined to take immediate and decisive action. Now, when Jonas mentions that her soldiers will not follow her into the mouth of almost a certain death, she asserts, and I quote, "I will not look back to see whether anyone is following me or not." Now, this is what Jonah is all about. She said that we won't be following you. You go alone. If you want to fight British, fight on your own. We are not going to take care of you. And she said that I don't care. Once I have taken the first step, I won't be looking back. If you are following me or not, you are shielding me or you are backing me or not. She then informs Jonas that she will charge the fort and will be the first up the ladder. And she dares him to follow her. And let me see that if you are courageous enough to follow me. Jonah, the ratchet guy, he responds that they must sail upriver and attack the English from the rear side. Fine, we will attack them. If you say that we have to attack them right now we will attack, but let's see from where we have to attack. We'll attack them from the rear side rather than from the front. But first, they must wait until God changes the wind, because Jonah is very much concerned about this wind. He then asks Jonah to go to the church and pray for an east wind, so that they can launch the attack. They live to find a church, but suddenly the page, he notices that the wind has changed, and he calls the maid and the bastard back. Juno thinks God has indeed spoken, and thus he says that if Jonah will lead the armies, he will pledge his allegiance to her. Well, we are seeing that Jonah, she is becoming successful day in and day out. Every passing scene we find that she is able to succeed at least in either manipulating the characters around her, or at least getting their consent, or their belief, their faith in her, that she can be the one who can rid France of the British control. And finally we enter into the fourth scene of the novel, and this scene is set in the English camp. Now, this is the only scene that would be set in the English camp. Just there would be one at the end of the play. But here we have Bishop of Bewise, Peter Kashan. There are three characters actually who are very important in this particular scene. There would be Richard D. Bishop. There would be Earl. He would be Earl of Warwick, and there would be his chaplain, Stogumber. There would be another character who would be important in this particular scene, and he would be Warwick. Now, scene opens as the noble Richard, Earl of Warwick. He discusses the recent series of unbelievable French victories with his chaplain de Stogumber, and he says that the defeats can be accounted for only by witchcraft and sorcery. Now, that is another development of the plot. Now, see what George Bernard Shaw is here saying, that these British men, they never thought that anyone can defeat them on the face of the earth with their might. But Jonah, she is succeeding day in and day out. She is launching attacks on the British army, and British army have failed to defy her. And they say that, see, whatever has transpired in past few months because of this Jonah, it's not because of her abilities, because of her courage, because of her bravery, but it is because of witchcraft and sorcery, because there is no other means that anyone can defeat the British. No simple girl could possibly have defeated the English forces unless she were an accursed witch, and this is what they think of Joanna. Now, Warwick reveals that he is ready to pay a large ransom for the witch so as to burn her. Now, this is what they believe, that once if ever she comes here, we are going to catch her and burn her. Now, a page announces the arrival of Bishop of Beers, Peter Kashan. Now, after Warwick acknowledges that the maid has now arranged to have Charles crowned as at Reims and that the English are helpless, Warwick offers his view that the maid is a sorceress who should be denounced to the Inquisition. Now that is another significant development in the novel, rather in the play. I often keep on quoting novel because I have been dealing with novel for quite some time, so there would be that novel will be coming up time and again. But that is a significant development in this particular play, what British are actually thinking about this genre. Now, what Bernard Shaw has actually done in the portrayal of Jonah is that he gives us insight of both the characters, what they think about Jonah, and initially even the French characters, those who actually belong to France, they also weren't having good opinion about Jonah, and so is the case with the British. They are not having any good opinion regarding Jonah. They are considering her a witch, an accursed witch. Now, D. Stegumber is more adamant in his condemnation, citing the numerous victories which Jonah has had over the English and her miraculous survivals on the battlefield. She says that she has to be a witch. She has to be a sorcerer. She cannot be a common girl. Had she been a common girl, she would not have been able to save herself in the battlefield. Now, Kashan is not wholly convinced that the French victories were caused by witchcraft. He subtly suggests that some little of the credit be given to the French leadership. Now, they might have done something, and he cites examples. However, he agrees that the maid has supernatural power. Jonah has got something different in her, but he attributes these powers to the devil. Now, he is not praising her. He says the devil, is employing Jonah to strike at the very basis of the Catholic Church. He says, and I quote, it is as one of the instrument of the design that the girl is inspired, but diabolically inspired. Now that is again significant. Now see, these British, they are believing this is not an attack on the British supremacy, rather this is an attack on the church, this is an attack on the Catholic Church. Thus, it is like something, Jonah is not a witch, but instead she is a heretic. Now, Kashan, he does not believe her accomplishments to be miracles, but simply that Jonah has better herd on her shoulders than to the blustering English generals whom she has defeated. Now he says that fine, if she has defeated them, it is not miraculous, she is not that great, but perhaps our soldiers were weak enough to confront her. However, he says that it is a duty of the church to save souls, which Kashan hopes to do. He says, I quote, the soul of this village girl is of equal value with yours, are your kings before the throne of God, and my first duty is to save it. Kashan then, in a long, diatribe, explains John's condemnation. John, he says, totally ignores the church and furthermore presumes to bring messages directly from God. Likewise, she and not the church will crown Charles. All of her actions are performed without consulting the church. In short, she acts as though she were the church. This is heresy in its worst form, and Kashan says it must be stamped out, burnt out. Kashan then catalogues a history of heretics, there's a reference to Muhammad, peace be upon him, John to Jonah. Heretics, he says, because they listen to their own personal voices and visions instead of listening to the collected wisdom of the church. What would happen to the church if all the individuals listened to their own conscience rather than to the church? Start saying things. Kashan vows to destroy all such heretics. Now, this is a significant scene from our significant speech in the play, which is delivered by Kashan. He would tell us about many features of this rebellion, John, and he says that she is not listening to the church, which is significant, and all the decisions that she had so far made, for example, taking the siege at Orleans was only her decision, then making Dauphin Charles VII of the Orleans or the Reims is another decision which is solely taken by Jonah, and he thinks that such a character is a heretic, and what she is doing is actually heresy, is actually against Catholics, and he vows that such characters should be wiped out from the earth. Now, Kashan, having vowed that he will destroy the heretics like Jonah, or those who commit heresy against church, he would be wiping them out of the earth. Uh, we will continue what transpires up next. Now, Warwick, however, is not impressed by these theological arguments that this is what has transpired, this is what he will be doing with Jonah, and this is what Jonah has been doing. He is not frightened that Jonah might become another Muhammad, peace be upon him, and create another great schism in the church. Instead, he sees a greater danger on that involves the very basis of the social structure of Europe. Now that is very important. What George Bernard Shaw is doing. He was a socialist also in thought, in his philosophy. He was against this feudal system, and he's also hitting at that. This particular politician is thinking that it's not only that church would be in danger, rather the social structure that we have created, that the feudal structure, that would also be in danger. And he said that John's views would do away with the feudal hierarchy of the aristocracy, a system in which the king is merely first among his peers. She would instead create a system in which the kings would be responsible to God, ruling as God's bailiff and dismissing the results of the nobility. Under this system, all of the nobility would have to surrender their lands to the kings, who would then present them to God, that is the church. Thus, king would be ruled by the church. Now, this is important. You are having a politician, and you are having a guy who's representing the Catholic Church, and both have got their on fears when it comes to Jonah. The one who for example, this Kashan, he's worried about the church. The church would be in danger. But on the other hand, Warwick is worried about the structure that he has made. He thinks that if Saint John, if she would bring up the God as the central figure in the world, then we will have to follow the church. He's even worried about it. In addition, the power of the feudal lords now comes from the allegiance to the common people. John's new system of social reform would shift that allegiance from the feudal lord directly to the king, leaving the lords without any power. Now they are worried about their power. Now, interestingly, Kashan, as a churchman, does not find this idea unacceptable. Though he's a churchman, he feels that whatever Warwick is speaking, he is speaking sense. Now, Kashan sees that Warwick is not concerned with John's effect on the church, but only with the nobility. Yet he listens, as Warwick points out that John's ideas about the nobility and the church are to Warwick basically identical. He says that there is no difference, because right now church is also ruling, the nobility is also ruling, and John can be a threat to both these classes. Now, in both the cases, Warwick says John would do away with any person who stood between the average person and the person's allegiance to his God or to his king. Now he says, and I quote, "It is the protest of the individual soul against the interference of priest or peer between the private man and his God." Now that is very important, and an important point also what George Bernard Shaw is hitting at. These popes and bishops who were actually becoming intermediaries between God and the common man, and common man wasn't having actually access to the real religious scriptures. And this is also one of the thing that these politicians and churchmen are worried when they are confronting John. Now Warwick labels this as Protestantism. Now this is important. Protestantism, it came very late in England, but he says that this is Protestantism. They are, the rebellions against the Catholic Church. Now Kashan then extends the analogy to something which he calls nationalism. Now, that is another important thing that erupts out here is the nationalism. That is, the Maid is trying to instill a sense of national pride into the common people towards their national origins. For example, he says, and I quote, "France is for the French, England is for the English, Italy is for the Italians," and so on and so forth. This is what he says. Now, there are two important things that are hinted at. One is Protestantism, and the other is nationalism, which is being portrayed through Jonah. This is contrary to the current state of affairs in which the church rule is universal rule universal rule, one way, one kingdom of Christ, and not several divided nations with different rules and different allegiance at that particular point of time. Now this discussion was going on between Warwick and Kashan, and the Stargamber, he was listening quietly to what they were discussing, and he has been thoroughly confused by this discussion of Protestants and nationalists, and simply says that the maid rebels against nature. He is not interested whether he is rebelling against church, he is rebelling against feudal system, he is rebelling against king. He says no, she is rebelling against nature. And why is she rebelling against nature? Because she is wearing men's clothes. And then he says she is rebelling against church by not listening to church but by listening to her own voices, and she is rebelling against God by aligning herself with Satan in witchcraft. Even though the Stargamber has missed the crux of Warwick's and Kashan's argument, all agree that the maid must die for the people. Now, in the previous scene, that is in this scene, scene 4, we dealt with what the English camp is thinking about Jonah. They are thinking that she is influenced by witchcraft, she's a sorcerer, she's a heretic, she has committed heresy, she is going against church, she is going against feudal, she is going against kings. All these things were being discussed between Warwick and Kashan. And now we enter into the 5th scene of the play, and this scene is set inside the door of the cathedral at Reims. Now we are back to the French lobby where the Dauphin has just been coronated King Charles VII. Now Jonah is seen kneeling before one of the stations of the cross. Jonas enters hoping to bring Joan outside and present her to the masses who are calling for her. But Joan says that she wants Charles, the new king, to have all the glory. Now, she is such a nice kind of a lady, when you go through her story, it's a touching story that she is always there ready to help others, but she doesn't want to, express herself in front of the people. Now, in a discussion between them, Denounces reveals to Joan that, while adored by the common soldiers and masses, she does not have many friends at court. And when Joan fails to comprehend the court's animosity towards her, Jonah explains that she has constantly proven herself superior to important and influential men, and now she and not the Archbishop is responsible for crowning of the Charles. Now these important personages resent being revealed as incompetent. Now that is an important revelation made by the bastard, that is Jonah, here about Jonah. Jonah was a very clean-hearted girl, a very clean-hearted protagonist. She would not think about these things. She had only one goal in her mind, and that was freeing France from the British capture, freeing the citizens of his country from a brutal rule. But look what these men around her are thinking. For example, the Archbishop or the Dauphin, the moment they see that Jonah is more courageous and more competent than us, so they start becoming jealous from her. And Jonah, she says, if this be the case, then she will return to her form after she has taken Paris. Now, once she has won the battle, once she has overthrown the British back to the England, she will give up this life of the soldier or the life of the leader, and she will return to his form. When Jonas warns her that many would prefer that Paris, that is the enemy right now, would take her, that is Jonah, Jonah explains that it is this type of wickedness which makes her rely on her voices, which gives her the confidence to keep going. She says, see, fine, but I know that all the men around me are not going to support me, but at least there is one thing that shall always support me, and they are my voices that I keep on hearing, which keep me, pushing forward. Her discussion of her voices, tends to unnerve Jonas, because no one can really understand what Jonah is up to. What are the voices that she is talking about time and again? Who is the one who is inspiring her with all these things? And all the people who are around her, they feel like at many times they think that Jonah has got something wrong with her mental ability. Who would think that she were crazy were it not for her very sensible and logical reasons for her battle strategy? Now, Bluebeard, and Lahire, they enter as Charles complains about the weight of his coronation robes and the rancid smell of holy oil. Now, this is a very strange kind of character. Dauphin, you will hate him for the role that he plays in the course of the story. When he hears that the maid plans to return home, he is greatly pleased. Now, at least finally, I am going to get rid of this particular character, that is Jonah. And this in turn discourages Jonah. Now, as she is talking with others, she suddenly tells Jonas, before I go, let's take Paris. As if she was going to get an ice cream from a shop. Before I go home, let's take Paris. Well, that's the strange revolution. That's the strange change of nature in Jonas, and what had made pleased Dauphin a while ago when he heard that Jonah is returning home. Now this deeply distresses and horrifies Dauphin, who wants an immediate treaty and no more fighting. Now everyone from here onwards starts deserting Jonah. Now as Jonah becomes impatient with the king, the Archbishop enters and tries to restrain Jonas impetuously. When Jonah speaks rather sharply to the Archbishop, he reprimands her for disregarding the authority of the church and for not having clothed herself, and for having rather clothed herself in the sin of pride, inviting just punishment from her excessive pride. Now, that is the development of plot in the play further. Those people who actually had supported Jonah up to this time, but once Dauphin has become the king, now she is being deserted by everyone. Now, Archbishop, who once said that Jonah was a pious soul, now is considering her a sinner. Now, Jonah asserts that her voices are her own authority, and she recalls the many triumphs which she has effected. Now, again, Jonah comes with a voice that it is my voices that I am listening to. I don't have to listen to the church. I don't have to listen to the Archbishop. I don't have to listen to the Dauphin, the king. I have to listen to my voices. And she simply asserts, you don't know how to begin a battle, and you don't know how to use your cannons, and I do. And if I know how to use my cannons, let me do. Now here, Jonas interrupts to acknowledge that while God was on her side earlier, the time of miracles is now over. He tells her that please don't be so emphatic now. Maybe God had helped you earlier, but now that is not the case. You won't be able to survive now. It is now time to rely on military experience rather than on your voices. Furthermore, Joan never concerns herself with cost, supplies, and manpower. This is something that we know about her in the play. Jonas then points out that if Jonah is captured, there is no one who will come forward to ransom or rescue. Now, that is another important thing that you need to remember from the play. Now, how these people are changing their stance towards Jonah, and what great statement has he made that Jonah, who is out to help everyone, he says that if you are captured this time, we are not going to free you from the British. But she asserts that France, that is the crown, will ransom her. Now she has hopes at Charles Dauphin, Charles VII, whom he has helped to become the king. But what? Charles immediately denies this. He also says that even I am not going to help you if you are caught this time by the British, especially since expenses of this dreadful coronation which she forced on him have taken his last cent. Now when she puts her trust in the church to aid her, the Archbishop warns her that they will drag you through the streets and burn you as a witch. Now see how everyone is deserting Jonah. She thought that military would be supporting me, whom I was leading up to this point. Jonas says, no, we won't be helping. Then she said, Dauphin would be assisting me if I am caught. He says, no, we won't be helping you. Then she says, church would be helping me. But even Archbishop says, no, I am not going to help you. And Peter, Kashan knows his business of convicting a heretic, and this is what Archbishop is talking about British. Now once British have caught you, they're not going to let you go. Now Joan is dumbfounded. Now she has acted only as God has instructed her to act. She cannot believe that the church will not protect her now. When the Archbishop accuses her of being proud and disobedient, Jonah protests. asking how she could be disobedient when she has faithfully obeyed her voices. Now these voices keep on coming one again and again. The voices that come from God, she says that. And if I am listening to the voice of God, I am actually listening to the church. And when the Archbishop asserts that the voices are only the echoes of your own willfulness, they are not the orders of the church, Jonah simply points out one basic truth. Her voices have always been right, and all of her earthly counsels have always been wrong. That is, the counsels of the church. Now the Archbishop ignores this fact and gives her a last warning. If Jonah continues to follow her judgment rather than the church, she will be disowned by the church, the Archbishop, by the crown, King Charles, and by the army, Jonas. And he tells her, you will stand alone, absolutely alone. Now, Jonah then confronts her earthly compatriots and plaintively cries out that she has always been alone on this earth. In the same way that France is alone and bleeding, and in the same way that God himself is alone. I am also alone. I have fought alone. I have only heard my voices. You have not been there with me. And I am alone. She hoped to find friends of God in the court of France, because God is a friend of everyone. But she now knows that as the loneliness of God is his strength, so too shall her loneliness be her strength. In God's name, she says, she now has the strength to confront the enemy until she dies. She will go to the common people who love her, and they will gain enough strength from their love to confront her. And the hatred which these men of power hold for her, then if she is indeed burned at the stake, she will go through the fire to the hearts of the common people forever and ever. And it is at this point that she departs from the court, saying, God be with you. Jonah leaves the court, and all these characters who are actually talking to her, for example, the Archbishop, Jonas, and Dauphin, they were talking to her, and they are all silenced for a while, and then Bluebeard remarks that the maid is quite impossible. You cannot help her in any sense of the word. Jonah says that personally he would jump into river fully armored to rescue her. But if she were caught by the enemy in a foolish Compan, he would leave her to her doom. And Lahire, however, is inspired to follow her even to hell. And the Archbishop is disturbed in his judgment, and Charles wishes only that Jonah would be quiet and go home. So now Jonah has left the court, and she is heading towards the Orleans to launch a siege on the British. Now we'll be heading towards the last scene of the play, that is scene 6. And the scene is set in the great hall arranged for a trial, with a circular table surrounding a rough wooden stool for the prisoner. And we are told that 9 months have elapsed since Jonah's capture, and as we learn later, Warwick has ransomed Jonah from her captors and has turned her over to the ecclesiastical court to be tried for heresy. So eventually Jonah is caught, she is imprisoned, and she is tried for heresy, what actually Archbishop had hinted at in the previous scene. Warwick, who is forbidden to be present at the trial, has come to inquire of pious Peter Kashan about the progress of the trial. The court has already held 6 public and 9 private examinations, and there seems to be no progress. But as Warwick departs, the court assembles D. Starkember and Canon D. Corsels. They protest to the court that their 64 meticulously drawn up charges have been reduced to only 12 indictments. The Inquisitor, backed by Kashan, explains that the court is not interested in trumpery issues. The great man issue is heresy, and all of the wild, silly accusations about magic serve only to confuse the issue. Now we are discussing the trial of Jonah. She has been imprisoned by the British people and she is being tried for heresy, and the inquisitors, they are asking for the punishment for Jonah. Now at this point, the young priest Ladivino and wonders if Jonah's heresy is only due to her simplicity. And here the Inquisitor answers in the longest speech in the drama, asserting that heresy often begins with simple people who are often generous, lovable, humble, and charitable. People who are saintly simpletons. Heresy, he says, begins when a simple woman rejects her clothes for the dress of a man and continues until this vain and ignorant person sets up her own judgment against that of the church. I know this is what they are thinking, and attempts to interpret God's will, believing always honestly and sincerely that her diabolical inspiration is divine. Furthermore, the maid is pious and chaste, but diabolically pride and natural humility are side by side in her. She admonishes her judges that they must avoid being either too cruel or too sympathetic towards her. Remember, only that justice comes first. Now, Kashan agrees with the Inquisitor and he reminds the court of the great danger called Protestantism, in which private individuals set up their own private judgments against the collected wisdom of the Church, thus threatening the mighty structure of Catholic Christendom. Now, that is important even here, what the idea of heresy is given in this particular speech by the Inquisitor, who thinks from where does the heresy come, and he hints at a significant incident from the novel, that the heresy begins when woman starts putting on men's clothes. That is where this all starts, and the Kashan is again showing the same concerns of the end of the Catholicism and like the beginning of the Protestant. Now it is at this point Jonah is brought in. Now she is chained in chained by the ankles and showing the strains of long imprisonment and harsh treatment. Now she is immediately attacked on some minor points by the prosecutor when Jonah backs at swearing to tell the truth once more. Now this time for around 10th time, she is threatened with physical torture. Now Jonah agrees to obey the church only if it does not ask her to deny the heavenly origin of her voices. Now again, this is an important motive, that is the heavenly voices that she is time and again talking about. Furthermore, if the church bids her to do something contrary to God's command, she cannot consent. Now these assertions cause extreme consternation among her accusers, who consider it a heresy to even think that the church could suggest something contrary to God. Now when Ladino pleads with Jonah to accept the authority of the church, John maintains that she has never disobeyed the church, only that God must be served at first, and she believes herself to be in the state of grace with God. And D. Estevit then charges Jonah with having the intercourse with evil spirit and for dressing like a soldier. Jonah defends her voices as heavenly voices, and she explains impatiently the necessity of her dress in plain common sense terms, that it would be foolish to live among soldiers while dressed as women, and furthermore in an enemy prison it would be even more foolhardy to wear petticoats. Now as Joan continues to make impatient and pert or sarcastic replies, she is reminded that the executioner is standing directly behind her, a man who confirms that the stake is ready for John's immediate burning. Joan finds herself in desperate despair. She is terrified of burning at the stake, but she asserts that her voices promised her that she would not be burned. And Ladino and Kashan, they use her fear to make her confess that her voices have betrayed her. She finally agrees that her voices have deceived her, because only a fool will walk into a fire. Now God would not accept her go to the stake. Now here Nobody listens to what Jonah has to say. Now she is sentenced to spend the rest of her life in solitary confinement and perpetual imprisonment, living only on bread and water. Now, upon hearing her sentence, Jonah immediately denounces the recantation document, dreading imprisonment in a rat-infested hole more than the flames of the stakes. She tears her confession to shred and denounces the assembled court as fools. She cries out that she is not frightened of bread and water, but only of being shut away in darkness, of being denied the light of the sky, the sight of the fields. Living in chains forever, she says, is impossible. Now, to keep her from the very force of life is the counsel of devils, for she states is keeping God's counsel. She pronounces the court to be unfit for her to live among them. And the Inquisitor and Kashan, they immediately pronounce her a relapsed heretic. And they state that she must be cast out and abandoned. Now, Joan is brutally hurried to the stakes. Now, she is followed by led away, who will be by her side for her last confession. And when Jonah is burned alive, the flames can be seen inside. Now, Kashan says that he wants to stop the burning because of some technical irregularities, but the Inquisitor stops him, explaining that the church proceeded in perfect order and it is the English who are guilty of irregularities. This fact might be useful in the future because of the innocence of the maid, because most of the people thought that Jonah, these irregularities were actually her innocence. She was burned for no sin, for no crime of hers. The Inquisitor then explains that Jonah was innocent because she understood nothing about the proceedings. She was merely crushed by the church and law. Now, it is here that the novel ends, that Jonah of Arc is buried alive. Now, that was all about the plot of the novel Saint John, and it began with a conflict of a very enthusiastic young lady, a brave lady who wanted to take a siege at Orleans, and at the end of the novel we saw that everyone betrayed her from the side of the French, from her side, and eventually she was buried alive. Now, up next we will be dealing with the review of this particular play. If you fail to remember any part of the story of this play Saint John, which deals with the story of the Joan of Arc, who actually was burned alive at the end of the play, let's have the review of the story. Now, the first scene of the play takes place in the spring of year 1492 AD in the castle of Captain Robert de Baudricourt. Here we are introduced to Robert de Baudricourt. He is described as a handsome and physically energetic man with no will of his own. Now, in this scene, we find Robert bewildered, for there are no eggs, and his steward informs him that the hens will not lay eggs because, I quote, there is a spell on us, we are bewitched as long as the maid is at the door, I unquote. The maid is Joan from Lorraine. She was fired some 2 days ago, but she is still at the door. Sir Robert asks her to come in. As she enters, she informs Robert that he is ordered to give her a horse, armor, and some soldiers, and that he must send her to the Dauphin. Sir Robert is offended and thinks that she is mad. She further tells him that she is heading to Dauphin of France to raise the siege of Orleans. She knows that a siege would be possible because the voices of Saint Margaret and Catherine have told her what to do. She further tells him that some of his noblemen, such as Bertrand de Pauly, is anxious to go with her. Joan maintains that she is following the instructions of her voices, which she will not further discuss, which tell her that English are only men and that they must be forced to return to their own country and their own language. She tells Sir Robert that he will live to see the day when there will not be an English soldier on the soil of France, and when there will be one king, I quote, God's French one, I unquote. Now, after being convinced of John Lorraine, he grants her request. Now, scene second is set in the antechamber of the throne room of Dauphin's castle in Chinon. The Archbishop of Reims and La Trémoille are discussing the sum of money which has been borrowed by Dauphin. Joan of Arc has reached here, and Giles de Reyes, better known as Bluebeard, enters and reports that John is having significant influence upon soldiers. Now, this is confirmed by Captain La Hire, who believes that John must be an angel dressed as a soldier. Now, Dauphin receives a letter from Sir Robert asking him not to meet Joan since she is not a respectable woman. Now, after some more arguing, Bluebeard offers a challenge. He will pretend to be the Dauphin, and if the maid cannot distinguish royalty from common blood, then she is a pretender. If she can, then she must be heaven sent. John, dressed as a soldier, enters and with cropped hair is admitted, and she creates an immediate sense of hilarity among the ladies because of her attire. Bluebeard tries to deceive her but fails, and Jean drags Dauphin from the crowd. She tells him that she has been sent to free the France and to crown him king in the Cathedral of Reims. Now, everyone, including the Archbishop, is convinced that Joan is a pious woman. Dauphin is presented as a weak character, but Joan tells him that she will put courage in him, which he refuses. The scene ends with the blessings of Archbishop and an order that the army must obey the orders of Joan of Arc. Now, scene third. This scene is set on the south bank of Lorry River near Orleans. About 7 weeks later, Jonah, better known as the Bastard, is waiting for the wind to change direction. A page enters and Jonah asks about the maid. All of a sudden, John enters and the west wind stops. She tells Jonas that we would attack Englishmen immediately. Jonas refuses, citing the expert advice of senior men, but Jonah does not listen and dares Jonas to follow her. Scene ends with Jonas pledging his allegiance to her, that is Jonah. Now, scene 4 is set in the English camp. 3 characters are important from this scene: Richard de Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick; de Steugember, chaplain of Earl of Warwick; and Peter Kashan, Bishop of Bears. Now, scene opens with Warwick discussing the victories of French army. They do not credit these victories to the brave abilities of John, but to witchcraft and sorcery. Peter Kashan announces that the maid has now arranged to have Charles crowned at Reims, and the English are helpless. De Steugember is more adamant in his condemnation, but Kashan is not wholly convinced that the French victories were caused by witchcraft. He agrees about her supernatural powers and says that she is inspired but diabolically inspired. Kashan again vows to destroy Joan for being a witch and anti-Catholic. Now, scene 4 continues. Warwick, however, is not impressed by these theological arguments. He sees a greater danger on that involves the very basis of the social structure of all Europe. John's views would do away with feudal hierarchy of the aristocracy, a system in which the king is merely first among his peers. Even Kashan, as a churchman, does not find this idea unacceptable. Warwick says John would do away with any person who stood between the average person and the person's alliance to his God or to his king. It is I quote, it is the protest of the individual soul against the interference of the priest or peer between the private man and his God. He calls it Protestantism and extends the analogy to something which he calls nationalism, and says she is inculcating among citizens the idea that France for the French, England for the English, and Italy for the Italians, and so forth. De Steugember, who has been thoroughly confused by this discussion of Protestant and nationalist, and simply says that the maid rebels against nature by wearing men's clothes, against the church by listening to her voices instead of church, and against God by aligning herself with Satan in witchcraft. The scene 5 is set inside the door of the Cathedral at Reims. Dauphin has just been coronated as King Charles VII. Joan is seen kneeling before one of the Stations of the Cross. Jonas enters hoping to bring Joan in front of masses, but she refuses. Jonas reveals that Joan has no friend in the court because she has always presented herself as superior to others. If this be the case, Joan says she will return to her farm after she has taken Paris. Jonas warns her that many would prefer that Paris would take her. When he hears that the maid plans to return home, that is Dauphin, he hears that the maid plans to return home, he is greatly pleased. Now, as she is talking with others, she suddenly tells Jonas, "Before I go home, let's take Paris." Now, this deeply distresses and horrifies the king, who wants an immediate treaty and no more fighting. Everyone now deserts Joan, including King, Archbishop, and Jonas. Archbishop, he reprimands her for disregarding the authority and for having clothed herself in the sin of pride. She says, "You don't know how to begin a battle, and you don't know how to use your cannons, and I too." Jonas interrupts and to acknowledge that while God was on her side earlier, the time of miracles is now over. It is now time to rely on military experience. Charles, that is Dauphin, denies his support to Joan. Archbishop warns her that they will drag you through the streets and burn you as a witch. She departs saying that God be with me. As Joan leaves from the scene, initially all are silenced. Then Bluebeard remarks that the maid is quite impossible. Jonah says that personally he would jump into a river fully armored to rescue her, but if she were caught by the enemy in a foolish Compan, he would leave her to her doom. La Hire, however, is inspired to follow her even to hell. The Archbishop is disturbed in his judgment, and Charles wishes only that Joan would be quiet and go home. Now, scene 6 and last. This scene is set in the Great Hall arranged for a trial. Joan of Arc has been arrested by Englishmen and has been imprisoned for 9 months. Warwick has ransomed Joan from her captors and has turned her over to the ecclesiastical court to be tried for heresy. The court has already held 6 public and 9 private examinations, but there seems to be no progress. Kashan explains that the great man issue is heresy, and all of the wild, silly accusation about magic serve only to confuse the issue. At this point, a young priest, Leduino, wonders if Joan's heresy is due only to her simplicity. The Inquisitor answers in the longest speech in the drama, which is about heresy. Joan is brought in, chained by the ankles and showing the strains of long imprisonment and harsh treatment. D. Estivit then charges Joan with having intercourse with evil spirits and of dressing like a soldier. Joan defends her voices as heavenly voices, and she explains impatiently the necessity of her dress in a plain common sense terms. "I would be foolish to live among soldiers while dressed as a woman. It would be foolish to live among soldiers while dressed as a woman." She is finally sentenced to spend the rest of her life in solitary confinement and perpetual imprisonment, living on only bread and water. Upon hearing her sentence, Joan immediately denounces the recantation document, saying she does not care about water and bread, but she cannot live in darkness without seeing the green fields, blue sky, and nature. Finally, Joan of Arc is buried alive, and we are told that her heart didn't bury, rest of her body turned to ashes. That was the review of the story Saint John by George Bernard Shaw. Now we'll be heading to the last section of the lecture, and that is the ending of the play. Now let's see how does the play look like at the end. Well, the ending is written only in one line, that Joan of Arc is burned alive, not buried alive, but burned alive. This is how the play Saint John ends. At 100 FP, today we dealt with a play by George Bernard Shaw, Saint John, and at the end of the lecture I'll be telling you something about the play. We have read the story of an emphatic lady, Joan of Arc, and if you think that this was a fictitious story, let me tell you that this was not a fictitious story. This was a real story based on a real lady from medieval medieval times. She was a French lady and she fought in the 100 Years' War. And here comes one of the paintings of the Joan of Arc. Now she on your screen is a Joan of Arc. She was a 19-year-old lady when she was actually burned alive. She did all what George Bernard Shaw had said or written in this particular play, and the way the play ended, in the same manner ended the life of Joan Arc in 1400, or in the medieval times when 100 Years War was going on between England and France. Now that was all from 100 FP from the world of literature. Don't forget to share, subscribe and like. Keep watching the world of literature for more interesting videos on literature.